Right, I think now is a good time to go ahead and get started. So, first off, thank you everyone for joining us on President's Day for our second monthly conversation hosted by Together We Remember. My name is David Esther, and I'm the founder and CEO of Together We Remember. Our mission is to empower the next generation of leaders to make never again a world without genocide, mass atrocities, and identity-based violence a reality once and for all. Every April, we organize remembrance vigils around the world to commemorate victims of different atrocities throughout history and empower those leaders around the world to actually make a difference in their community year over year until we achieve our ultimate goal. And in our last conversation, we had Ivy Seamus, a teacher at Marjory Stoneman Douglas, who is also on the line with us today, as well as one of Ivy's students, Lizzie Eaton. And we talked about how they're transforming remembrance into action in the Marjory Stoneman Douglas community in Parkland and also around the country. And this week we have the honor of having Susan Bro with us. And Susan is the mother of Heather Heyer, who was killed in Charlottesville during the Unite the Right rally. But Susan has also transformed remembrance into action in such a powerful way in founding the Heather Heyer Foundation and in speaking all over the country and to young people around the world about how they could honor Heather's legacy and really bring do some bridge building work around the country. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Keel to explain how our conversation is going to go, and then we'll jump right in.
Sure. Thanks, David. I'm Keel Majewski, coming to you from Madison, Wisconsin. So we're going to have 30 minutes or so of moderated questions and answers with Susan between me and David, and then we'll have 10 or 15 minutes toward the end of the call for your questions. So if you have a question, you'll see down at the bottom of your screen, I hope, a little chat box. Just type it into the chat box, and we'll be monitoring those, and hopefully we'll be able to work them in toward the end of the call. So now, turning to our guest, Susan Bro. Susan, bring us up to where you are now in your life. Take a few minutes. Just tell us about your life before, during, and after August 12th, 2017. And you can incorporate as much or as little about that day as you want, but help us understand how you got to now.
But on Friday, the 11th of August, 2017, I was a government secretary working in a small government office, had just finished the audits for the financial year and closed the books, said I'll be in Monday to work on the civil rights files updates. Walked out the door, spent Saturday morning hanging out with my best friend while my husband went out of town to have a guy day, and got the phone call got the phone call and took off to Charlottesville to find out what happened to my daughter. At 7 o'clock the next morning, knocks started happening on the door. And I made a choice as soon as I heard that first knock, how I wanted to handle it. And I thought, Heather should not be silenced. Her voice for positive, nonviolent change was not going to be squashed out by hate. And it was up to me to carry that message forward and maintain that message and maintain it loudly and clearly. So I decided I would talk to reporters and I would control the message that way. And that's what I've continued to do. I have no schedule to my life as far as a regular paycheck, a regular job of, I'm home on the weekends or home for lunch every day. It's like I haven't left the house in the last 3 days, but I've been working at home, and I have trips on my calendar across the country back and forth. And I set up meetings with the press as they contact me if I believe in what they're trying to accomplish. I do turn some people down because I don't believe in what they're trying to accomplish through hate or through hateful rhetoric. So my life is now spent trying to help heal some of the breaches in the country, but in a way that allows for positive change, not just merely sweeping hate under the rug or saying, oh, well, it'll be okay if we all just get along. No, there has to be more to it than that. And so that's how I spend my time. In addition to speaking, I'm trying to write children's books, write some adult books, and trying to make a difference in a lot of different ways. We also, we formed the Heather Heyer Foundation 9 days after she was killed because money just kept pouring in. Even when we closed the GoFundMe right after the funeral, money continued to pour in through all directions. And I said to her former supervisor, we need to do something responsible with this money. So he had worked with scholarship programs before and said that was something that we could do. And I said, that sounds good. I used to be a school teacher. And so within 9 days, we had filed the IRS paperwork. We have given out scholarships of about $4,000 last year. This year, we're looking to give out about $8,000 in scholarships and hoping to expand those. And we're also developing youth empowerment programs called Higher Voices. We're also looking to do some work in the elementary school realm with art projects, hoping to set up some difficult conversation circles with adults and college students. And so we have a lot going on, but nobody's full-time, not even me, because I have my LLC handles my talking and speaking, my speaking and writing, sorry. And I have a couple of volunteers part-time, so it's kind of tricky to get everything done, but we're doing our best to make things happen around us.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for sharing that, Susan, and going into those memories. And I hope you know that it's in Heather's honor and in her memory that we're gathered here listening to your wisdom. So thank you very much for sharing that. And now David has a question for you.
So, I think when we decided as Together We Remember to engage in Charlottesville after what happened, we realized there was a lot that we had to learn really fast about the local context. And I think many folks around the country also have a lot to learn about Charlottesville. And it's through our relationship that we've gotten to know a lot more. And so what I'm wondering is, what do folks typically not know about Charlottesville? What bits of the past and the present would be helpful for us to know more about to understand what happened as folks who are mostly coming from outside of Charlottesville in this conversation?
A lot of us have allowed the mythology of Charlottesville as a peaceful, progressive town to flourish. And Charlottesville is a wonderful place, particularly if you're at least moderately wealthy and white. It's not been so kind over the generations for people who are not white and people who are not wealthy. And I knew that, having lived there as a poor person when I was pregnant with Heather in my first marriage. I didn't even have money to catch a bus. And I was pregnant with Heather, holding the hand of a little boy who did not want his hand held, and walking 3 miles just to get him to the daycare center so I could go to work. And that was in the summertime, early summertime. So that was pretty miserable. And I knew that circumstances like that existed, but I kind of blocked it out and have moved further north. And so I had sort of forgotten all that and played into that mythology. The truth is, Charlottesville was built largely on the backs of people of color. It on Emancipation Day, it was 54% Black population, and yet their neighborhoods and communities, which at one time were thriving, have largely been razed to the ground and replaced with new housing, the downtown mall, businesses of various sorts, modernization, gentrification, and they have been pushed somewhat into prescribed neighborhoods where the income levels are very low and life is very challenging for many of them. Now, having said that, there are still many who are thriving and doing quite well. But I think a lot of people overlook and forget that aspect of Charlottesville. And right now, that has boiled out to a very deep set of tensions. August 12th was not the beginning of civil rights issues in Charlottesville. That battle's been going on for quite a long time, and it's certainly not the end of it. There's still major battles being fought in school board meetings and city council meetings, affordable housing meetings, and there are positives and there are negatives happening all the time. It is just like any other city, and it's a very small town, really. Very much a place that needs to continue to work and to face its, not only its racist past, but the white supremacist systems that are in place now.
And so, Susan, tell us a little bit about the formation of your identity and your message in Charlottesville in the wake of August 2017, because when I think about such an environment that's become so disturbed and so polarized, I would want to think about how all those things are working. When I state my case or choose sides, who does that exclude from my sphere of influence, and how do I form my message? So tell us, how were you able to know what platform, the points of your platform, when you started speaking out publicly after Heather was killed?
Heather and I had a lot of conversations over the years about our beliefs and our belief systems, and we believed the same things. I just knew that as a government employee, I could not speak up. I was not allowed to have a political opinion. I was not allowed to have a public opinion about much of anything, because when you're a government employee, you're paid by everyone's taxes. So I kept my mouth shut a lot of times. Heather was not bound by that in the same way, and she was paying attention. I mean, the Facebook motto that she adopted, or the motto that she adopted on her Facebook page, was, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. And I was one of those people really not paying attention. I was a grandmother of 8. Kim and I had not been married very long. And I was pickling, canning, crocheting in my spare time. I was not reading politics. I was not paying attention to the plights of people of color. I was not really paying much attention to the news at all. And I'm embarrassed to admit it. I believed in fairness. I believed in justice. I believed in equality, but I was choosing to put my head in the sand, as many of us do, because we want to go about our daily business. Now, finding my way around in Charlottesville has been a little awkward. I don't live there. I live a half hour north of there. And I'm not always welcome to share my opinion. I'm not always welcome to speak my mind. I've often said at this point, I've managed to irritate the right and the left pretty heavily, so I'm probably right where I need to be. I try to take a balanced view of things when I can. You can't always take a balanced view. Hate is hate, and you need to call out hate when you see it. But particularly as a white person, we often say things that are racist and hateful without even thinking about it, without even being aware of how it comes across to people of color. And I'm learning. It's a learning process, and Charlottesville is pretty volatile right now. So sometimes I just keep my head down and stay out of things where I don't think I'm of any use there. When I feel like I have something that's worth saying or worth hearing, then I'll speak up. But honestly, sometimes the best path is to be quiet and listen for a while.
Right. Yeah. They also say it's hard to be a prophet in your hometown, or you're, you're kind of both, because you're half an hour north, but also that's your general vicinity. But have you found broader resonance for the message you're trying to speak outside of Charlottesville in different parts of the country?
I think so, because so many people in Charlottesville are already woke. I know that term's kind of old now, but it still sort of expresses the fact that you are awakened to what's around you. And so I find that I probably am listened to a little better in other places, because people may not have given as much thought to their opinions on things or to how they feel about certain things.
Can you share just a couple of examples of some of the audiences that you've had a chance to speak in front of? I know there's some that are quite large, some that are smaller, but sort of can you paint the picture of some of the first few major speaking engagements that you have, just so folks get a sense of the fact that your message is reaching quite a broad audience?
Sure. The United Food and Commercial Workers Minority Coalition, based out of Washington, D.C. I first encountered Don Cash there, who is the president of that union. And I first encountered him at an NAACP meeting in Charlottesville, where I stood up and said, honestly, Heather got so much attention for her death because she was white. Had she been a person of color, had she been male, probably wouldn't have gotten so much attention. And they appreciated my honesty. And so I've spoken to them. The Coalition of Black Trade Unionists have had me at their annual convention. I've also spoken to BBYO International Convention, which was, I get mixed up on my numbers, anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 Jewish teenagers from around the world gathered for their annual convention, or biannual, I forgot which it is. And I spoke to them actually only 3 days after Marjorie Stoneman's shooting, and that was in Florida that we were. Some of the kids who were at the convention said that they knew some of the kids who had been shot. I've spoken in Seattle to the National Federation of Paralegal Associations, spoken at the VMA Awards, spoken on the Ellen Show.
Yeah, you've definitely been on the national circuit, which, you know, anytime I've seen your remarks, I think some of the messages you've expressed here, you've expressed on the brightest of stages. And I think, to me, that's what's among the most refreshing aspects, and why I'm so excited to collaborate with you. Is just, it's important to hear some of the tough love that you have to share for our country out loud. And there aren't that many folks who have that courage to do that. So it does mean a lot, especially as we do bridge building work. So the next question that I wanted to ask was, you know, we often use the phrase "never again," right? And in Ivy Seamus's class, "never again" definitely came up often. A class about the history of the Holocaust. It's a phrase that the Jewish community really relies on when we talk about preserving memory of the Holocaust. But it's also a phrase that the students at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas and in the March for Our Lives have gravitated towards. And so I want to ask you, when we say "never again," what does that phrase mean to you?
We should not be going down a path in our country that has already been demonstrated in past history to lead to mass atrocities. A path that encourages people to laugh at the discomfort of others, a path that encourages people to view others as less than human, a path of hate. And yet here we are back on this path again. Hasn't even been 50 years ago. And it seems like about every 50 years we hit this path again. Somehow, as human beings, we're not learning from our mistakes, and we have to stop this pattern.
Yeah. And so, Susan, if somebody on this call or somebody who heard you speak was moved by your story and talking about Heather and wanted to honor Heather's legacy, what's something you would tell them how can they get involved right away?
Well, immediately I tell people, okay, in honor of the foundation, I will say you can always donate to the foundation, but that's not enough for me. And that's not even necessary because not everybody has money to donate. I'm asking you as a human being to get your head up out of the sand and look around and see if you really think that everyone around you is treated equally and treated fairly. And it might be race, it might be religion, it might be just that somebody doesn't smell as nice as you think they should. Maybe they don't have the same kind of clothes that you think are popular. Maybe they have a speech impediment. Maybe they have a learning disability. I don't know what the difference is, but look around and see whether people are being treated fairly by those in authority and by your friends and by you. Are you honestly, truly seeing fairness all around you? Are people treated equally valuable, whether they're treated exactly the same or not? Because I may have different physical needs than someone else, but my emotional needs will be the same. So I ask that you look around and see what difference you can make. Now, if you feel like that's enough, then maybe that's as far as you can go right now. But I also ask you to stop and look at your talents and abilities. Is there something else that you can do that can make a difference? Can you design a t-shirt logo that says something positive and affirming? Can you write a song? Can you write a poem? Can you write a story? Can you hand out socks to homeless people? What can you actually do to put feet to your intentions? Direct action is what Martin Luther King Jr. often called it, and that's getting your body in a place of involvement, getting your abilities, getting yourself out there so that you're actually making a difference. I was listening to some of your other participants from last week as we were opening up, talking about they're going here and they're going to that place and they're going there. And I'm thinking, I can't do those things because I have health problems. My husband has health problems. We have limited finance. And so I missed the chance to do some things over the weekend because I didn't feel well. But I'm doing what I can. And so we all do what we're able. That's one major thing I'm asking. Just do what you're able to do. Heather was not known for her activism. She was not known beyond Facebook and her group of friends. She would tackle public figures on Twitter and on Facebook that she felt were saying inappropriate things or handling themselves inappropriately. But what she was most famous for doing, or best known for doing, I won't say famous, was talking to people one-on-one. So when she, even on the day of the rally, as the Nazis and the protesters were leaving, she was missing in action for a while, and Courtney kept saying on her FaceTime video, "Where's Heather? Where's Heather? Where'd she go off to now?" And when they found her, she was talking to one of the young ladies who was packing up to leave, and she still had her helmet on. And Heather was asking her, "Well, why are you here? I mean, why do you hate people? Can you talk to me about why you believe what you believe?" And she was trying to engage the young lady in one-on-one conversation to have her do some self-examination, because so often when people have these irrational hatreds of other people, when they start talking about it, they realize how irrational it is. They can't really justify why they're saying what they're saying. And so that was Heather's talent and ability, and just to stand in solidarity with her friends. And maybe that's the only thing you can do, but just stand up and do what you're able to do. That's what I would ask you.
Yeah, thank you. So I had a couple questions that I wanted to follow up there, but when you mentioned Heather having one-on-one conversations with people, I think that's the realm in which a lot of us feel like we might be able to have impact. And sometimes, we try to have those conversations on social media, but that's a difficult environment to change anyone's mind. And I think a lot of us are interested, Susan, in practical strategies for how to engage someone respectfully that has political views maybe that you think are like so deeply offensive to who you are as a person, but still you want to respect them as a person. So Have you encountered any like practical tips or tricks that we could incorporate into how we try to have those conversations?
First off, although you may need witnesses for your own protection just to verify what's been said, and they may feel the same way, so you want to not necessarily be in a completely private environment. But true conversation doesn't happen on Facebook. True conversation doesn't really even happen on Messenger or Instagram or any of those things, and definitely not with TV cameras rolling. One of my complaints about reality TV is just the presence of a camera alters everybody's responses. There's a certain posturing that has to happen and certain stances that are taken. So your best bet is to have a more personal conversation. And you definitely need to start out on positive points of connection. If it's your cousins at Thanksgiving, think back to a time when you were kids and you all played football after dinner. Or think back to a time when you played Barbies. Try to open up a conversation with positive points of connection and some happy memories to get those happy fuzzies going in the brain to start out with. And you may need to do that a few times before you even begin to broach political conversation or racial conversation or any kind of conversation of justice or beliefs. You have to have an established point of connection in a meaningful and honest way before you can even begin to start to point fingers or become more distant. But you also need to very strongly take a moment to listen to the other person. It doesn't work if both of you are listening and neither one of you is talking. But I always take the listening stance. I will poke and prod a little bit. Well, like, can you share something about how you feel about abortion? Can you tell me why you feel that way? And try to hear what they're saying. You may be surprised, and you may not be. You may be completely right to think they're a racist idiot with misogynist tendencies, but you won't know if you don't listen. You really have to listen to the other person and see what it is that motivates them, what drives them. Are they acting this way simply because that's the way they've always acted? Their family has always voted this way. They're, are they listening to fake news sources? Are you going to be able to discuss that with them? Just exactly how are you going to approach them? You're going to have to go a little bit on intuition, but you must have those positive connections and you must listen to them before you even begin to have those discussions.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Susan, because it's very, very much what we tried to do when we engaged in Charlottesville with your help, right? So we organized, so for the folks on the line, we organized a Together We Remember vigil in Charlottesville. Number one, there were no video cameras. There was no photography, really. It was a private gathering of city leaders, the same city leaders that Susan was referencing as really not seeing eye to eye. We basically had representation from everyone except for, the far right, those who were really engaged on the Unite the Right rally, which was an achievement for us. Just getting those folks in the same room was not easy. And it was in that meeting that we didn't solve all of Charlottesville's problems, but we had a professional facilitator lead us through a dialogue to find our common humanity, to get to know each other beyond the name, beyond the identity that you might see when you walk into a room or what you might have heard about. And we were told or invited to really, one of the questions was, who do you rely on? Like, who is someone in your life that you rely on? And then as everyone answered that question, it just opened up the doors to a much more human connection. And by the end of that meeting, we ended up generating ideas for how people across Charlottesville could transform remembrance into action and get more involved and take the next step. So, and we're going to work on a part 2 of that, hopefully this coming April. So I just wanted to mention that Susan's offering these suggestions, but together we're actually practicing it. And we're trying to figure out, how to take things to the next level in Charlottesville and with you guys beyond. So now I wanted to, Keel, I think we'll shift over to the next question that you had.
Yeah. Susan, you had mentioned you can only do what you can at any given moment. One of the things that I struggle with as someone who really is trying to create positive social change is that balance between when I let myself off the hook and say, okay, I can't do any more right now, balanced with the urgency of the people I know who are suffering and what their lives are like, especially when we're talking about genocide and all these sorts of things. So have you encountered that tipping point, and how do you judge that?
Coming late in life to public activism, I feel a particular urgency. I'm 62, I'll be 63 at the end of this year, and I feel like I have a good 5 years to swim really hard upstream. But at the same time, I have health issues. And I have a fairly new marriage. I have 8 grandchildren. I have a living son and 2 stepdaughters, and I owe them some of my time as well. I remember growing up, I don't do religion now, but I remember growing up in the church, and so often the pastor's kids were the ones neglected. And I remember hearing the phrase, ministry begins at home. So I'm constantly having to figure out how much time do I owe my family, how much time do I owe to the work, and how much time do I owe to me? Do I have time to sit down and just drink a cup of coffee and stare at the TV for 10 minutes or an hour? Do I have time to read a book that I want to read? I gave up some things. I gave up all the canning, all the cheese making, all the crocheting, all the knitting, because to me that was not as important. But I don't get to every activist event that I want. I don't get to every march that I want to. I did a march in Cleveland, but I could only walk a block, and then I had to drop out and go sit in the church and wait for my speaking. I was a keynote speaker. You just have to really pick and choose. But if you lose the battle at home, you can't really pick that one back up again. You have to maintain your relationships. A lot of people go into activism as a single person, and in many ways that's simpler. But it's also nice to have that person to travel with me. It's also nice to have that person to cuddle with when I need a hug. And so there are trade-offs. You have to decide what your priorities are. But I will tell you what I've seen so often, and I hear complaints from other activists, is people come running into the movement gung-ho, full throttle, and then they burn out in a year to 5 years. That does not serve the movement well. That does not serve you well. That does not serve society well. And maybe that's why we end up here every 50 years, because people burn out. You're going to have to sit down and think about what your priorities are for yourself, for your budget, and for your personal family life. I have elderly parents that are still living. I need time to go see my parents. I have on my calendar now an appointment to call my parents every week, because otherwise I would forget. And that's shameful to admit, but the truth is I'm so busy that I have to schedule time to talk to my own parents. You just have to really make a priority for how you want to spend your time. If you're in high school, if you're in college, I'm going to talk to medical students and residents and doctors next month. And you can imagine the challenges on their time. So I think for me, activism has to be a mindset. It has to be a lifestyle. And you have to see how you can incorporate it into daily living. One of the simplest ways is to make a point to look people in the eye. I know that's not really cool in New York and bigger cities necessarily, but I have found in my travels that simply looking the waiter or waitress in the eye looking the doorman in the eye, looking the luggage handler in the eye. Just acknowledging the humanity of people around you can make a huge impact.
Wisdom.
I like to end on, and we'll open up to questions because we're running out of time. I want to definitely hear from folks on the line. The last question I'd like to ask Susan is, what gives you hope?
I get hope because I do see so many people trying, so many people talking about it. In some ways, things are getting so bad that fewer people are able to ignore them. And as much as I hate to see things getting worse, at least it's making people pay attention.
Yep. And if we're not outraged, we're not paying attention. So there definitely are folks who are expressing that sentiment now, and we are doing our best to do it in a constructive way. So
Right.
we're very grateful that you were able to join us and share so much of your story and your work. But now I'm very eager to open the floor to questions. And I'm curious, Ivy, since you were our speaker last week, I'm wondering if you have questions on your mind or just a brief reflection or reaction as someone who has also experienced, really deep pain within the past year or so, and recently having to, with the 1 year mark of February 14th. I'm just curious how this conversation is sitting with you right now.
Oh, boy, I'm so glad I tuned in here. Susan, I think that you are remarkable. I feel so sad for what you had to go through. I understand. I can't relate exactly the same, although my students are my kids, it's not the same exactly, but you are so beautiful and smart and insightful, and your words of wisdom are beyond. I just cannot believe how poised and it's just you're really an inspiration. I'm very impressed. My thing is this, and I've come and encountered numerous families who lost their husbands and their children. I lost 2 students inside my classroom, and I've become very close to the parents, and their pain is palpable. But what strikes me is they've started funds, like the boy in my class who was killed. He's a swimmer, so they have the Swim for Nick Fund and the Safety for Schools because of Alex Schachter. And there's a whole bunch of organizations that they're raising money for these amazing causes because their family members were killed. But what I see strength in them coming together, and I feel like you're a one-woman powerhouse on this, and I'm just wondering how you feel about that, as far as this happened and you're coming out without, I feel, not so much of a support system like they have in Parkland. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but if you can address that.
I was reached out to by a lot of mothers who had lost their children to acts of hate. Ironically, Judy Shepard and I have never been able to speak to one another, but her liaison and I have had originally spoken several times or would run into each other at meetings. There is a support network virtually out there, and then I have friends and family around, but there have been times it's very lonely. I sat here yesterday and cried a good bit. I can't tell you why yesterday was hard. It was just hard.
Right. It just goes from day to day. I know, but what you're doing is fantastic, and I can't. I mean, I really think that you are very, very strong.
Thank you. Some days.
I know.
I wanted to make sure, thank you, Ivy, for chiming in, and Susan for your answers. I wanted to make sure we got in Cantrell's question here in the chat box, and anybody else who might have joined the call late, you can type a question into the chat box here and we'll be able to work it in our last couple minutes left. But Cantrell is wondering, what encouragement would you send to young people, maybe between the ages of 15 and 20, working at the local level on social issues that often intersect with implicit biases?
I think that our hope is in young people, so much so that the main goal of the Heather Heyer Foundation is to empower and support the education of the next generation of activists, advocates, and allies. I think that that's where our future is. So many of the mindsets of the past are heavily ingrained in people my age and on down to even in their 40s. And my hope is in the young people making a difference, not only in the biases around them as those are gradually erased and adjusted, but also in raising their own children in the future. If you think about it, many of them will be parents in the next 10 to 15 years. And so that gives me hope for the next 2 generations at least. And maybe we can keep that pattern going. But just continuing to reach out carefully, cautiously. I would say protect yourselves emotionally and from liability. Don't allow yourselves to be tricked into situations that can be dangerous to you. But by all means, be active and approach people. But also, I would encourage you not to be brash with people who are older than you, because even if you do know better, and you often do, they're not going to listen to you unless they respect you. So you've got to earn respect.
That's the tough talk, the tough love we want from you, Susan. Thank you so much for that. I wanted to, I know the students in Montana might not have access to the chat box, so I'm just going to take Billings West off here and ask if you all have any questions. And you can, I don't know, Rob Stanton, you can MC that class there. But does anybody have any questions for Susan? I'm fine with awkward silence too, guys. So that's okay. You can think about it for a sec. And in the meantime, Susan, I wanted to read this quote for you in the chat box from Celia Cash, who said she just wanted to thank you and Susan for sharing such deep words and feelings. Susan, you inspire me and make me want to do better. I am sorry for your pain. Paz y amor.
Thank you. Celia is a Facebook friend I met. She lives in Alaska, and she's fighting her own battles for justice for the elderly there. Yeah. There are many fields of battle to be chosen.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh.
Well, last call from Montana. Anybody think of a question? If not, then I want to throw it back to David. Going once? Maybe?
We have one.
Okay, hit it.
When did you finally realize that this was a beginning of a change in your life to honor your daughter? So,
a change in her life or my life?
Your life, like how it promoted your activism, and like you have to, did you feel like you have to do something, or you're obligated to do something, or you just want to honor your daughter?
My biggest concern on the first moment was that people know that she was out there protesting nonviolently. And it kind of escalated from that. It was imperative to me that the truth be told correctly. The police had assured me, and evidence has borne to that fact, that she was with the nonviolent protesters. That was very important to me because I knew Heather was about nonviolence, and I could see that message getting skewed very quickly. I still have to battle that message along with a bunch of other messages that want to take what she was doing and why she was there and what she stood for sideways. But that's what pushed me to deal with the reporters the first day. I wanted to make sure her voice was not silenced and that the truth was told correctly.
And I think part of what was really impressive to me, Susan, was how you shifted the message, and you came up, you really beautifully honored Heather's legacy, but at the same time allowed the opportunity to not have her be the center of attention in that process. And I think that is challenging, and it's not something that everyone do so skillfully, and you were able to do that. So it has made a really big difference, I think. All right, so we are just about at our time together. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Lastly, I just want to do a quick plug that we are about 6 weeks away from the beginning of April, which is Genocide Awareness and Prevention Month, the month when we are organizing Together We Remember remembrance vigils all over the world, everywhere as far as Zambia to Cambodia, France, here in the United States, and would welcome the opportunity to organize a vigil, to work with you to organize a vigil in your community, your school, your faith congregation, whatever it might be. You could simply go to togetherremember.org to submit the sign-up form, and then we'll be in touch, share resources, and help you design an awesome vigil that helps demonstrate what your community can be at its best. So with that said, thank you so much to everyone for joining. We'll be setting up another conversation about a month from now before we kick off our global campaign. And I think we'll keep doing this. Thus far, it's been really, really awesome and meaningful. So thank you, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Ivy. Thank you, question asker.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
guys.
much. It was
Bye-bye.
awesome. Bye.